Perhaps there may have been improvements with respect to buildings that were not accessible in any way before. And attempts are being made to standardize all of these levels so that we're all working on a level playing field. They're historically based on other types of prior experiences with, for example, wheelchairs. In the case of Catalonia, in the case of lift dimensions, the functionality of these minimum cabin dimensions have been developed even more and evolved. What type of service can be provided to users depending on size, and to what extent could these improved accessibility measures actually benefit users? There's other indicators which we consider to be less accepted. This is one that measures accessibility in relation to energy efficiency as a numerical quantifier. 60% of compliance in accessibility would indicate that, well, this is not really showing us anything, it doesn't reveal anything new. We can see things more clearly if we're able to be more objective, or at least qualify the levels regarding facilities for users, improvements for specific users, and again with improvements which focus specifically on wheelchair users with an idea to achieve different levels of improvement. Furthermore, there's also a concern at European level to monitor all of these improvements, all of these challenges in the renovation of our urban areas, the renewal of our urban areas, stems from administrations that need to create mechanisms to monitor these improvements in order to determine where we are succeeding and where we're going off track, or when the results are less optimum. And this has been referred to as the digital building logbook, which is very similar to the building book that was in place in Spain through the corresponding legislation. But this is now only for new buildings and has now been included for existing housing stock. So this will allow us to assess improvement potential, but very often this has not been quantified. In the case of energy efficiency, there is a very clear quantification. However, this is not the case with regard to accessibility. For this reason, at this moment, we're working on quantifying this and determining the way in which we can standardize these improvements for accessibility. For example, there are other cases, such as the General Council of Technical Architects of Spain, to facilitate the implementation of this building book. A series of accessibility levels have been defined, and these may be ones that we consider to be more logical, or the ones that they in the Council consider to be more coherent. So from a social standpoint, it's important for these to be standardized and rolled out nationally. And this is my final slide, which I think is very clear. Although I've been using this for percentage-based methods, we should just leave that to one side, but I would like you to focus on this image for a specific requirement, for example in yellow, which could, let's say, be defined accessibility. We should see accessibility not just as a global indicator or parameter, but rather as something which is formed or which encompasses different needs. One being, for example, adaptations and improvements for people in wheelchairs, others for users with visual impairments, or cognitive or auditory or sensorial or hearing impairments. So we need to be able to quantify these different improvement steps so that final users and administrations can clearly understand the improvement that we've managed to implement, when at least we haven't managed to achieve the level stipulated in the technical code. Thank you very much, and that's everything I wanted to present this afternoon. Thank you.
Gracias, Elena. Vamos a...
Thank you, Elena. We won't have time for a coffee break because many of you have to leave. So at the end you may have a drink. There are refreshments outside. If you need a physical pause, you can also do so. We're going to continue with a round table where we're going to have the participation of several members, and where Enrique Hueso is going to moderate, and he's going to moderate and present this roundtable of this last thematic block. Enrique Hueso is manager of the Association of ABRA since 2016. He is chief of the legal department since 1992, an association that was constituted in February of 1998, and it was agreed its creation by many social and public partners, all dedicated to urban planning and services, moved by the idea of bringing together all of their efforts to defend common interests. Is national. Its national headquarters are in Valencia, and sorry, I made a mistake. It's not ABRA, it's the Rehabilitation Association of Valencia. I ask the rest of participants of the roundtable to join me here. Sergio Serna, Diego Carrillo, Elena Frías, Felipe Pich Aguilera y Miguel Suárez Torres. Please join me.
Vale, está el micrófono. Vale, no os preocupéis. Vale. Distribución, el moderador.
The moderator. Is it best for him to sit here or there?
O en medio, ¿cómo preferís? ¿Aquí? En medio, entonces, vale.
For the moderator to sit in the middle.
Gracias, Enrique. Bueno, mientras que
Enrique.
va poniendo el micrófono al resto de componentes.
While we mic the rest of the roundtable participants, Sergio and Diego are going to make a brief presentation. And then we're going to have Elena Frías, Felipe Pich, and Miguel Suárez. I'm going to introduce those that you don't know. Sergio Serna is a geographer and by the University of País Vasco. He co-founded in 2017 tech-friendly consultancy company specialized in sustainability and intelligent cities, which offers integral services for strategy and urban solutions with technology. He co-directs a multidisciplinary team with many professionals from many fields, and his presentation is going to talk about mechanisms focused on innovative processes in urban regeneration and social housing. Diego Carrillo Mesa is an architect and from Celover Cooperativa in Barcelona. He's got a master's from the Polytechnic University of Catalunya, and he received an award as a young professional in 2008 for a proposal for El Salvador. And between 2005 and 2010, he worked in Morocco, and he managed projects in habitat and urban improvement in international cooperation. Since 2010, he created Celover, and he has focused on the development of projects of cooperative living and ecological living. And he is going to talk about the case of the living cooperatives in Catalunya. And now I'm going to talk to you about the Miguel Suárez from Pich Aguilera. He has a degree in architecture by the Polytechnic School of Madrid, and he's got a master's in architecture from the Polytechnic School of Barcelona. His experience spans from firms and always in the field of sustainability and efficiency. He specializes in BIM coordination, visualization, and everything linked to architecture. He joins Peach Aguilera Architects, and he is the office manager of the firm in Madrid. So I leave the roundtable in your hands.
No, vamos.
Miguel, are you going to do a presentation?
Complementamos. Bueno, yo he preparado un examen complejo.
We can't really hear because they're all speaking at the same time. Unfortunately, we apologize. What I thought of doing is, first of all, allowing the speakers to present their presentations first, and then those of you in the public can ask questions. I would, however, as organizer and member of the scientific committee, would like to say two things. I represent the public land managers. What are we? If we're going to talk about control, quality and social commitment, we really are the ones that embody these. Because if the Constitution says that we have to guarantee people with fair dwellings, we are the ones that guarantee as much as possible that right, the right to live in good housing. Why? Because we are fundamentally the ones that manage and promote housing and land. We are the ones that administer the public heritage of land, and we are the ones that set the conditions that and guidelines that the housing then will follow. We are also the ones that promote the building stock, bearing in mind that they have to, of course, comply with the legal requirements. When I come to these conferences, I think it's fantastic, but it's very important to bear in mind how we're going to incorporate all of this into social housing, specifically social housing at levels where guaranteeing that is a challenge. We are 150 companies within AVS, which is the association of the Spanish Association of Public Housing and Land Managers. We are an association that intends to guarantee the right to housing as something essential. The reform law suppressed the competencies of managing land in municipalities and town halls. We managed to hold our own. Really, this was something we managed. And something else I wanted to talk about and clarify. We are comparing ourselves with Austria, with Germany, that we're saying that we don't have social housing. Andalusia is a great example because we have 50,000 housing stocks which are administered and managed by the public administration. We don't have as much for rent. In Spain, from 1981 to 2018, we have built 2.5 million social housing. We have allowed many Spanish people to own their own homes. Yes, ideally, we should promote more houses for rent, but housing policies in Spain have differed from those in Europe. And something else that I would like to say, the members of AVS have promoted housing for rent and for sale, and that has meant that 1.5 families, not people, families, are occupying houses that are linked to public land management and property management. So how to incorporate all of this evolution, comfort and quality into our paradigm is something that I think we need to bear in mind. I would also like to highlight that it's important how all of the analysis is being carried out to understand comfort and quality within social housing stock. And fundamentally, we are in the administration, public administration, at all costs, the ones that are going to implement next generation funds and allocate them for rehabilitation. We are part of a European group that is and we are the ones analyzing comfort and accessibility. One of the things that our housing stock suffers from is lack of accessibility. And forgive me, but I wanted to add this information and provide the point of view of public land managers and promoters. So I'm going to give the floor now to Sergio. Sergio, you have 5 minutes. Please, can you project the presentation? Thank you. Is the presentation loaded?
No lo sé.
Bueno, yo no soy la encargada de esto, pero no sé un poco. Intentamos.
¿Está o no está?
Tiene que estar. Pero prefiero no tocar para que.
¿La buscamos?
Viene ya. Está, ¿no?
Bueno, que no hace falta si.
Ahí está.
No lo sé, estoy pensando. ¿Ya? ¿Empezamos?
Sí, ya sí. Está ya completo.
Begin? Wonderful. Here it is.
Bueno, voy a ir rápido.
I'm going to be quick. I've only got 5 minutes. I'm a rare avis within this conference because of my profile and what I represent. Having listened to the previous conferences and taken the baton from Enrique, I'm the managing director of a company that works in the urban environment, specializing on strategy and urban development and also smart cities. I also wear another hat that I think today is suitable because I'm the technical secretary of one of the associations of the Ministry of Science and Innovation, and I'm going to represent public policies with regards to innovation. You represent the last section of the housing policies. You're talking about building instruments, talking about specific cases, but there is a lot to be said to what happens beforehand, instruments of public policy that need to be applied and so on. We have instruments to change things, but they are complex. I am going to ignore all of this part and I'm going to go directly to the tools for experimentation in public policies. We have worked in public policies applied to innovation, and much of what I've heard here is that you apply innovation to the construction of social housing. But that is part of a value chain that we cannot forget, which is economic promotion. There's an industry and a fabric that has to adapt to the needs of a market, because don't forget that this is a market. It's a value chain that is managed by a market. Doing this competitively and intelligently and smartly generates wealth. And we feed a market and a technological process that reinforces our capacity to be a competitive country. Enrique asked what kind of technologies would be useful for certain housing. I would say let's try them. You know a lot about this, but I would say let's test it in different environments. Test it in real conditions, but within a delimited area. We have different ways and a lot of technology to test different models, and these tests we have a new law of science from September 2022 that allows us to use parts of the city as a lab, which allows us to promote public innovation. We have instruments of public policy that allow us to do pilot testing that before we couldn't do. We did them, but in a different manner. You've all participated in European projects, and there is legal framework that prevented us from being able to implement them, but we did them and we presented results, and that was it. When we focus on the concept of lab city, and kind of we need to think about the model of building and sorry, we can't hear the gentleman because he was speaking away from the microphone. We have several cities, Valencia, Valladolid, Barcoy, and not Madrid, unfortunately. We have an approved sandbox, which means that I think Valencia and Serialco are broad enough sandboxes to test all of these concepts. And they have regulations and mechanisms that allow us to test technology outside of the regulation. And this is important because when you build, you have a great load of regulations. What happens with the things that are innovative that you don't know whether you can use or not? We have the mechanisms to test them and to finance them, which is fantastic. Testing and financing. Because the risk of testing certain things depends on investment, because the risk has to be shared, of course. We're talking about, therefore, that many of the concepts that we're discussing here, we need to find a way of testing them. Andalucía is going to be the receptor of the highest amount of FEDER funds. I don't know exactly, but half of the FEDER funds that are coming for Andalucía. The ministries have developed the operational programs. Means that with the way the legal framework is structured, a lot of the funding is coming to Andalucía. And a lot of the funding is devoted to this kind of policy. Volumes destined to the FEDER funds at autonomous region level. And we need to bear in mind that the public policy instruments required are the ones that we have here. Fostering sustainable housing is essential. And we have a great opportunity to include the social concept and all of the elements that you have mentioned here, and all of these things at these sandbox stages, experimental stages, and we can fund them through publicly buying innovation and applying the sandbox concepts. It was Enrique who asked me a question and has kind of changed the direction of my presentation. You've spoken to me, Enrique, about a specific technology. Perhaps certain things might not work in certain environments. That's why the sandbox possibility is fantastic. Let's use the European funding and let's test this in specific types of housing with a specific type of technology. Probably the technology that the architectural firms are providing are going to be a lot more efficient than the ones used up until now. But the land on which this would be built has to be borne in mind, because it might not be possible or plausible. The presentation that you gave previously, you spoke about the urban agenda. I think it's important not to forget that we have a European emissions policy. Unfortunately, the lady doesn't have a microphone. We can't hear her. We can't hear the lady. She's not using a microphone. I think emissions policies, and we really need to implement the value change. We have a great opportunity, really. We all have to work together, the public policies management bodies and those who, who have a stake in all of it. Thank you.
Bueno, sales. Vale. Más o menos.
Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the Scientific Committee for having invited us to offer this presentation, and it's been a wonderful surprise for us to leave our comfort zone. My name's Alvaro Carrillo, and I form part of a cooperative called Celebet, which refers to an interior courtyard that you referred to this morning. Our cooperative, ever since it was founded, has been focusing on housing rights and energy transition, and we're a multidisciplinary team. We're a bit weird, in fact. And today I'm going to talk about one of the strange projects that we're involved in, and which has characterised us ever since our origins in our fight for the right to decent homes. Basically, I'm going to talk to you about our experience in the tenure model, or tenure assignment model, which is advantages from both different models and a series of advantages or benefits that we can later discuss. Basically, the tenure model is a collective promotion or development model which aims to develop a housing stock outside, or which is not affected by speculation, and which is not affected, or which doesn't depend on it being a private development. The majority of these are social housing projects, but not all of them. Their degree of implementation in Catalonia is currently 50 projects which have already been completed and are occupied, and others are in the promotional stage. And in the rest of Spain, it's more or less the same in percentage terms distributed throughout the country. And in the last 8 years, more or less, it's picked up in speed, and we believe that it's here to stay. Our projects have a unique characteristic. They don't only include private spaces and common spaces, such as lifts, etc., but they also include community spaces, because they are projects that aim to give rise to new models of coexistence, where the collective acquires its own entity. Therefore, users participate not only as users of the building and the dwelling, but also as participants in the entire development phase, from the design of the dwellings and to negotiation with the financing entity, etc., depending on which stage of the project they are in. And this adds complexity to the process, and you can imagine how complex it must be, since, on the one hand, certain social housing requirements and regulations have to be complied with, which are very strict. Certain quality and health requirements have to be complied with in relation to comfort levels as part of the development. And in the case of particularly sensitive collectives, collectives that are very sensitive about this question of community living, it's important to remember that the values of ecology, of health ecology, are transversal or cross-cutting. Therefore, if we were to add community life, which in typological terms gives rise to different buildings, well, you can imagine that the totum revolutum is extremely complex. We have to comply with the maximum quality and comfort standards with the development who's on board from the very beginning, because they have to understand how we work, achieving the highest levels of ecological efficiency. And in many cases, they're not familiar with this. So I'm going to talk to you about a very specific project, the Cides building project in Roquetas in Barcelona, because it's a urban project for a community and it's ecological. So initially what we had to determine exactly the type of regulations that had to be complied with in order to, in volumetric terms, obviously resolve the question of this building's location between two different forms of urban fabric. As regards its community nature, it's a building that seeks to, let's say, do away with this fine line between the public and private spaces of buildings, and also between the private space of the dwelling and the community space of the dwelling itself. In this image, you can see the red area, which corresponds to the paved area which enters the building, which goes up floor by floor. And on each floor, there is a landing or gallery which is like an expansive area for these private areas where users are able to live in a similar way and do their different activities in a similar way as they do in their private dwellings. And given our commitment to ecology, the users had to decide not to build an underground parking area. They wanted to build or construct a building made with wood, which would comply with passive house standards. It hasn't been certified, but it complies with these standards. It's been built in dry wood. All of the elevated sections, particularly the facades, have been done in using a dry system in order to facilitate recycling. And as I said before, the design is based on passive house standards, which has given rise to important savings in terms of primary and non-renewable energy of between 50 and 80% below the near zero emissions building requirements established in the building code. Well, time's run out. We've got a couple more projects that I'm just going to go through very quickly. This one's also in Barcelona. We're exploring construction technology using this type of compressed earth construction in these common spaces, rammed earth, and a combination of timber and also reinforced concrete to resolve acoustic issues. And a third project, well, this is private plots, therefore the plot has to be acquired in addition to everything else. This is being developed using prefabricated concrete and with centralized units, etc., etc. As a conclusion and to wrap up, again, we're obviously at a very complex time. The commitment of industry is a necessity, as is the commitment of technical experts. But at the end of the day, it has to be society that will make all of this possible. And this just refers very briefly to the previous presentation. The aim, of course, is to ensure that we guarantee the right to a decent home and also try to fulfill our objectives in relation to the ecological transition. Thank you very much indeed. Sergio. Yes, you stuck to the time allocated. Okay, we've got until 6:15 because of the delay. So what I do think is that we should, out of courtesy, give the floor to Elena, Felipe, and Miguel and see if any of you would like to say anything more before we ask anyone from the audience if they would have any questions or comments. Well, perhaps I can start. I have to be honest that in this forum, I feel as if I've talked about something a little bit more original, because we've focused a lot on energy efficiency and sustainability. And accessibility, however, since society demands this so much, it's sometimes a case of not believing the solutions that exist. I know it's not easy to resolve. It's true that we face new challenges on this planet, But these challenges require us to be more sustainable, and we have to try to maintain and conserve what we already have, and that is very difficult. That's my point of view, at least from my field of specialty. It's very complicated indeed. Sometimes we ask ourselves, is it important to increase visibility at the expense of worsening other conditions of existing buildings? For example, courtyard ventilation systems, facade conditions as well. I was discussing this with a colleague. And also the installation of lifts in street areas to facilitate accessibility, but sometimes those streets or roads perhaps offer little space, so it's not that easy. So it's a bit like developing rather strange and unusual elements, and we're not really sure how they will work or not. So I think it's a question of trying to find solutions, leaving the existing housing stock as it is, and perhaps allowing society to move towards other new solutions. And depending on a person's age, they will use, well, a person will use the city in one way or another. There may be certain facilities or infrastructures which we can use, and which don't require us to live in a home, because sometimes we may be forced to leave our homes because the buildings where we live are difficult to adapt. Well, I've just thrown that idea out. I understand we don't have much time, so I'll be very brief. We're at a point where there's a lot of things that we want to incorporate, or society wants us to incorporate, but there's a tendency for us to be more minimalist. I consider that the buildings we should construct are made for the future, to be able to incorporate things in the future, but they're not elements that are the end product. And if we want an end product now, given all of these expectations we have to deal, we'll probably die in the attempt. So it's probably better to stop doing something, but ensuring that what you do well, and leaving things open for the world in the future, rather than trying to do everything and doing it half bad, doing it incorrectly half the time. And I think this would apply to our aspirations, etc. And we all know what I mean by this. Let's say, well, this would apply to a road or an aqueduct that may have been used for many things for which it was designed. However, it's been used for many things because there was a lot of ambition in what was done, and it was done well, and it was done precisely for the purpose it was intended to at the time. I agree entirely. But it's true that sometimes there are things we can improve, and improve well. But in other cases, we may be intervening. I know it's all about trial and error. I'm sure that if we were never to do anything, we'd never know what would happen. So through trial and error, we can determine what works and what doesn't, and that way we can move forward and just leave things behind if they don't work. And if things do work, then don't touch them. There are projects with certain intentions that are no longer viable. So architects, at the end of the day, have to be creative in our attempts to provide new uses for these buildings through new spirit, and approach this creatively. I think that that's what our task is. I think that the path that Felipe commented on, as if a building's like hardware to which we add software, is a perfect example of what you just said, Elena. In other words, how a free infrastructure that is able to change over time enables these adaptations to climate change as well as adaptations to changes in use. If we couple this with digitization methodologies such as BIM, well, this will make that building, that entity, an open system. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. That's all very well and good. The only thing is that whenever an elderly person says that they live on the 7th floor without a lift, it's almost like being imprisoned, and these people are unable to go out to the streets. So perhaps it's better to create an infrastructure can then be added to or taken away from. And that's a good idea. That flexibility, it's a bit like a computer that you can start adding or taking pieces away from. The circular economy already forms part of this. We have a project in Barcelona. A study was carried out of the possibility of treating this in addition to its heritage value, considering it from the standpoint of the value of its materials. So one of the important aspects of this building is it's been industrialized. It's an industrialized system which allows us to, let's say, break down the object, and a good digitalized method and approach in that building enables us to apply controls in the design phase to adapt the building to new uses, to change the parts that need to be changed. The climate's changing, there may be different weather conditions, and we may have to work in a different way. Maybe offices cease to have any purpose in that area. So all of these industrialized systems with, let's say, a carcass or an envelope that's been well designed will also give new forms of accessibility and habitability. I think that's very interesting. Anyway, I don't think we should monopolize this. Is there anyone from the floor, anyone in the audience who would like to say anything? Any comments or any burning issues that anyone would like to mention? I apologize, without the microphone we're unable to translate. We're unable to translate the question from the floor because the lady's not using a microphone.
A ver, el primer proyecto que he explicado
Well, two of the projects are on public land and another is on private land. The two on public plots, well, clearly the administration plays a fundamental role there in facilitating access to those plots. It's plots that's been donated or assigned to the cooperative for a period of 90 years, and the cooperative's commitment is to provide or develop uses for the development of social housing. So that's the fundamental role of the administration in these projects. Thereafter, it may perform other functions, such as to facilitate or provide subsidies or financial support to make the building more accessible. So that in this way, it's a way of giving rise to this type of housing stock, which is indefinite in time. As I was saying, we are developers and promoters of land and also buildings, and all public managers know this. You could promote developments that will continue to be yours, let's say, for your whole life, although it's for sale. And what about these next-gen funds? It's the public promoters that we're the ones who've had to reach an agreement with the local residents, the town council, the European Union, in order to be able to implement next generation funds. So it's a situation that concerns us. But of the three, two correspond to public land in the case of those projects. And as technical experts, we all know that technology only resolves part of the problem, and the effectiveness that we've been referring to is very important. Sometimes regulations hinder the development of these type of projects, but it's important to consider the uses modules and the way they're implemented in Denmark or Germany, and they incorporate this element corresponding to the transfer of properties. Perhaps I may need 70 meters squared today, but maybe in 20 years' time only 20 meters squared. And people basically will move around within the dwelling without losing their status in any way. And the degree of simplicity is much greater than that which we have today. And it's all about technology and management. As Felipe said, create a flexible structure, and in this way it can be adapted and adjusted accordingly. Good idea. Yes, I think that standards are often very rigid because they're often based on known standards, and they're often based on other solutions. And when regulations are based on solutions, it's often very difficult to design things that are not encompassed within those solutions. But the architects are here for a reason, to create new concepts and new solutions for society and convince administrations that they're making a mistake and things have to change, and let's improve things. and take new steps forward. But as I said, we also have the option of having temporary measured exclusions in order to perform tests, not just across the board, but perhaps we can develop pilot projects. But we need to have a courageous administration, and it's not difficult. You need to have an administration that's courageous, that has the valor to do this, but we do have reference frameworks. And specifically, these type of aspects relating to accessibility or materials and other type of criteria, well, we do have options for doing very specific things. And these will allow us to develop pilot projects, and if they work well, then they can be consolidated. And I think that obviously antecedents are very important in the scope of the administration. And you're touching upon a very important issue here, because often we're dealing with very obvious things in cities, mobility, etc., etc., and the potential of autonomous cars that may be the future. But I think there's a much more pressing issue, that's to perform tests with housing. And I also have the feeling that this is something that administrations are more afraid of than actually things like mobility. Yes, but the administration is obviously often like the body that has to set an example and will often dare to test things. Although it may not make them standard, it tends to be more conservative. It will have a tendency of normalizing what's already been very tested. But it's true. In relation to the world of urban development and certifications, we also need to present usage cases. I know that Sotto Voce are working on this. And again, we'll have to determine whether this is continuity in the future or not. So there are changes around the corner. But it's interesting to listen to what everyone's saying, because this sense of constriction or narrow-mindedness that is sometimes prevalent shows that we do have opportunities, but I think we have to examine this in more depth. Last week we presented a methodological guideline to the Ministry of Innovation, and local competencies are extremely limited, and they're supervised rigorously. But if we're able to convince the Minister and her team to include a line, we could do some really interesting things. Yeah, by the 25th century perhaps. Well, I think we could do some really interesting things in cities. But apart from that, it's also worthwhile considering that even my ministry are working on other interesting things. So listening to what all of you have to say is really interesting. But I think that if we can work together, and particularly if you're working with administrations such as in Barcelona or Valencia, in Madrid, the problem in Madrid, the other day it was rejected in the plenary session of the Parliament, but things of the City Council meeting. But anyway, I think we have to wrap up. But I would like to say one thing. Thank God we continue to have municipal competence at municipal level in this relation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to move forward at all. So we're grateful for that. I'd like to thank all of the panellists. We have stuck to the time allocated, but I think that everyone's had an opportunity to say something. Thank you very much indeed to all of the panellists. Thank you.
Un placer teneros aquí. Os pido disculpas en nombre de la organización. Hay un descuadre.
Pleasure to have you here. One of the speakers has to leave very, very quickly, and we're sorry because we had to cut your roundtable short. And now the closing speech by Bruno Sauer, architect by the School of Architecture of Amberes, and also Master of Architectural Critic by the University of Barcelona, Associate Professor by the ITU de Valencia, and from 2011 to 2017 he did this. Currently, he is the Managing Director of GBC Green Building Council and Vice President and founder of CPEA, Climate Positive European Alliance. founding member of the think tank G17 and the International Building Since Now movement, and a founding partner of Bipolar Arquitectos, an architecture and urban planning firm. He is author of several publications and books within the field of sustainable building. The title of his presentation, Sustainable Housing Within the European Context. He is the Director General of Green Building Council in Spain. Bruno, I give you the floor. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. I'm so sorry because I'm the one that has to leave and I cut short the round table. I admire all of you. I have a lot of respect for you. For being here still at 6:15, I would give you all a hug, but if I do so, then I can't catch my train. So, I'm going to talk to you today about sustainable housing within the European context, because everything that you will hear in my presentation for the next 20 minutes are things that you will have heard before, but I wanted to organize these and contextualize them for you. Why are we here? Why do we have to do these things? And so I wanted to add some suggestions. Normally, I have 3 minutes to present GBC Spain, but I have 3 minutes. We are the entity that represents at Spanish level the global green building councils. There's one per country, 70 in the world. 40,000 members that try to push the building industry to being more sustainable. And what I do is point out the uncomfortable things that need to be pointed out so that we grow towards sustainability quickly. There are 400 entities, companies and people within GBT Spain. We are an NGO and we have an assembly. All of the decisions are taken by all of the members. And we have a network of entities within Spain and Europe for collaboration of research, certification. I wanted to show you the network that we have access to for our knowledge acquisition and transfer, and for making sure that we can do things and push them forth. I'm going to present to you in 25 images a little bit about the theory of change. We have 2 reports here by 2021 and 22 with the website. Everything that we generate for GBC Spain is available free of charge for everyone. The first report of 2021 versed on the different stepping stones to transform our sector, and the second report talked about the urgent needs for this transformation. And those urgent needs are very clear: decarbonisation, health, integral renovation, resilient society, social economy and biodiversity. Why these 6 urgent elements? Why these? Urgent actions tell a story. We have integral renovation and rehabilitation, which means changing cities, land use and people. Because changing people's minds are the base to be able to get to 2050 with a country, sector and habitat which is completely devoid of carbon emissions. And how do we do this? In about 5 or 6 years, instead of 4 main pillars, there are going to be 8. But right now, decarbonization, health, circular economy and biodiversity are the 4 pillars. And for what? So that we can have a resilient society, trained people, aware and able to adapt to the change that is already upon us. But from where does this spring? We haven't invented it. We haven't foreseen this. There are national and international contexts that have brought us to understand this theory. These are the stepping stones, the elements that structure everything. And we need to think about regulation, financing, innovation, communication, enabling collaboration and measurements. And on the one hand, what do we refer back to? Where does all of this come from? This comes from the European context. Sustainable housing, the Green Deal, is a political concept and vision. It has to be a vision that can be transformed into a transformation tool. So we have the Green Deal and Fit for 55. By 2030, we want to reduce 55% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And for that, Europe has enabled the how we do this. And there are 2 frameworks, levels and taxonomy. How many of you have heard of levels? Taxonomy? I'm going to implore you, understand this in depth. Do not ignore these 2 elements. Levels is the framework that's going to change our technical understanding in the next few years, and our technical framework. It had to explain to you levels, I would need a lot of time, but with regards to taxonomy, it is the same framework that exists for the last 2 years that will transform the financial sector. In the construction sector within our world, we need regulation and financing, and those 2 levers that coincide generally are the ones that define the transformational content. And for what is the Sustainable Development Goals? They foster resilient societies, and out of the 17, 10 correspond to the social sphere, and only 5 pertain to the physical environment and 2 to institutions. So if we want change, how do we have to transform the sector? We have to understand why, how, and for what. These 2 levels and taxonomy are important. Why isn't biodiversity included in levels? Well, I think we should include in biodiversity more water, because for Europe is not the highest or the most important difficulty, but for Spain it is. Without water there's no biodiversity, without biodiversity there's no comfort, without comfort there's no health, and so on. Everything is interconnected. When we talk about levels, we have 6 main objectives: carbon footprint, life cycle, efficient use of resources, use and management of water, healthy spaces and comfortable adaptation to climate change, the cost of the life cycle and value. We talked about analysis of the life cycle. The taxonomy is carbon footprint and mitigation, circular economy, and efficient management of water, healthy health and well-being,
Y coste y valor, que es un tema de regulación técnica, en lo que es la regulación financiera no está. Pero como podéis ver, muy parecido. ¿Vale?
We don't have financial regulation here, which is also essential. The objectives are these words marked in green: life cycle, use and management, adaptation, life cycle, circular economy, management and use, ecosystems, and adaptation again. These words, this taxonomy, indicates a way of working, a modus operandis. When we see the red circle, this means that I have to point something important to you. The theory of change, if we bring it to the practical sphere, there are 4 quotes that are concepts which are essential. And I will give you examples for each of those that are very near in terms of the time frame. Thinking and acting bearing time in mind. That's point number 1. It might be very philosophical, but it isn't. The time factor is key for the next 5 to 10 years to be able to live comfortably in 20 years and achieve our objectives in 30 years. If by 2030 we don't do our homework, a lot of the regulation and technical codes and taxonomy, they really aren't going to do the trick. Designed for the constant adaptation process, in line with what we have heard here. Buildings are infrastructures that, although not finished, should be able to be adapted. There's a big change in the way we think.
Construir edificios pensando que final de obra es final de todo. Es final de algo acabado. Pues no lo es. A partir de ahora vamos a tener que pensar en que cuando tienes un final de obra, a partir de aquí tienes que tener un plan de transformación. ¿Vale? Podemos discutir mucho sobre eso y hay muchos ejemplos, pero no hay tiempo para profundizar. Invertir manteniendo propiedad y responsabilidad. El modelo de la vivienda de venta debería estar por normativa prohibida. Duele, ¿eh? Un poquito. ¿Por qué? Quien invierte y que quieren invertir en sostenibilidad, en un modelo que perdure en el tiempo, los beneficios los tendrás en el tiempo. Entonces, si tú te desvinculas del proceso después de invertir, no tendrás los beneficios. ¿Qué quiere decir? Si no tienes beneficios, no vas a invertir. Entonces, si tú estás convencido que un edificio sostenible tiene valor en 50 años y tú inviertes, mantienes la responsabilidad, la propiedad y el usufructo y los beneficios. Sabemos que es un debate muy difícil porque la última modificación sobre el tema de la ley de alquiler casi lo impide, lo dificulta, pero tenemos que trabajar en función de eso. Y la última, estrategias y políticas DSNH. Perdón, son sistemas. No sé si se os suena, ahora lo explico porque viene de la taxonomía. Es el inglés que dice escrito mal, es el DNSH, do no significant harm. No haces más daño de lo que ya existe. Tenemos una normativa y tenemos una mentalidad de pensar en la sostenibilidad que tenemos que mejorar cosas. Y entonces de repente hacemos un edificio, perdón, no quiero criticarlo, pero es un edificio passive. Pero passive solo trabaja en tema de energía. Muy bien, fantástico, ningún problema. Pero todo el resto de los aspectos no están dentro de ese concepto. Entonces, es posible que tú hagas un edificio energéticamente muy bien, pero en términos de salud, en términos de materiales, en economía circular, muy mal. Y este no es sostenible. Entonces, si hacemos algo, tenemos que pensar en, vamos a hacer ciertas cosas muy bien, pero ojo, en todo el resto no hacemos más daño de lo que ya existe. ¿Vale? Este es un concepto muy, muy importante. Ha entrado en el debate de Europa, en la normativa, en el mundo financiero desde hace 2 años y nos lo vamos a tener que acostumbrar. Lo que está por venir, pues ahora mismo os lo voy a confirmar con 4 ejemplos. El IPPC, marzo 2023, dice en su último informe, resumen de los últimos 20-25 años de trabajo, el tiempo para limitar el calentamiento global se acaba. Entonces, la mitigación, lo que es la limitación del cambio climático, ya está. Sí, aunque queremos mitigar, el efecto va a ser tarde. Por lo tanto, en su informe de 2023 de octubre, el foco va a estar 100% en la adaptación. ¿Qué es adaptación? Adaptación no es una rehabilitación energética de una fachada. También. Pero una adaptación es tener un pasaporte de un edificio, en lo cual con la comunidad de vecinos dice, los próximos 5 años tienes que hacer eso. 5 años después, el otro. 10 años después, el otro. 20 años después, el otro. Es un plan de adaptación según las necesidades sobre un objeto que tienes en propiedad.
Can you, now you can hear me?
Bien para mantener el confort, la salud, etcétera, etcétera. ¿Vale?
And
adaptación.
health.
Aquí el IPCC lo dice. Segundo tema.
Adaptation here is important. Now I'm going to talk about
2023. Si queréis tener contribuir sustancialmente que un terreno, un solar, para construir, tiene una cierta indicación.
debate with the financial world and the regulation work. So do no significant harm when we talk about construction materials, biodiversity and pollution. Excuse us, there was a technical problem and we lost connection. So do no significant harm is very, very important, because if you want financing, you'll have to demonstrate that you comply with this. What happens in 2024? Instead of 2 improvements, we need to include 3. Circular economy is also included in this substantial contribution section. When in 2022 we talked about the do no harm section, 70% of the waste, non-dangerous waste, would have to be reused and recycled. Fine, I can do that. Now in 2024, when we talk about substantial contribution, we're talking about 90% of reuse of waste. We have to do an ACV calculation. How many of you can do that? And that has to be a public record. Design, bearing in mind circularity criteria, minimize the use of raw materials. It is a requirement to have a reuse and recycled percentage of, so almost 50% of a new construction have to be recycled or reused. And they have to be from circular economy. So the building as the mine where we harvest raw materials from, not go and get aluminium from a mine, but in a building. That is a prerequisite for 2024, and the building has to have a digital passport. That's a lot. That's a lot. That is why I'm saying that the changes are not for tomorrow, they're really literally for yesterday. And it's going to be a lot of adaptation, and we have to think about circularity, biodiversity. It's going to be a big challenge. This is going to be European regulation. And the last element that I wanted to talk to you about, the COP, pertaining to climate change. There have been 15 international conferences about conventions on biodiversity. They are going to be prerequisites for land management. To do a general plan for urban planning, you need to demonstrate that it adds. So challenge 1, biodiversity. Challenge 7, reduce pollution. Challenge 12, increase green spaces within the cities. And challenge 15, between 2025 and 2030, reduce $500 billion a year in subsidizing, because we will not, in subsidies that harm the biodiversity. We have to be aware of this. We no longer have the ability to, or the luxury to be idealistic. This is going to be imposed upon us. In 2023-24, you know, the review of the EPBD, Energy Performance Building Directive of Europe. Have you read the consequences that are listed within this? No. Well, this is basic for our building and construction sector. From 2026 to 28, new buildings will have to be zero emissions. But 2026 is tomorrow almost. So what you're building today and what is comes from allocated funds from the European Union, if it's not zero emissions, you don't have you don't get given the possibility of building. By 2027, the ACV, the efficiency, the certificate for energy efficiency, is compulsory for 2027. The MEPS, minimum energy performance standards, 2027 to 2033. Class E or Class D buildings will no longer be rented or sold. They have value 0 in the market. Value 0. 2027 is round the corner, and 2033 too, because we have to bear in mind public and private housing stocks. And there's only going to be a difference of 5 to 6 years. We're going to have to be so efficient, and we're going to have to gather so much data to demonstrate that our housing stock will have value in the future, that really is necessary for us to be aware of this. And I'm going to draw to a close soon, but first I want to say, what can you do? And I go back to the theory of change, and I'm going to talk about the levers. 1. Training. It tells me that in 5 minutes I have to leave to catch the train. Training. Previously I've asked you, do you know how to do this in several instances? You are in a conference about sustainability and innovation, and you are leaders, you are aware, and you're frontliners. But we don't know how to calculate an ACV. You don't know the taxonomy. We need to train people. Train about everything. And training essentially is very important in measuring, being able to measure how we've accomplished things. And in a meeting we had this morning, we agreed that if we don't start measuring the outcomes and the phases of use of our buildings, we're not going to be able to report before Europe by 2028. We're not going to be able to show with data how buildings are behaving to public buying of green buildings. Abra does this. Please, when we do public tenders, include measurements and systems and green green statistics and green behavior, so to speak. We have to measure the taxonomy. There's no problem with certifications. It's not about the logo, it's about the methodology behind that allows you to and guides you with regards to how you have to measure things and what elements are important. They are protocols to improve quality. Communication. What isn't communicated does not exist. What isn't communicated does not exist. So communicate results, numbers, percentages, improvements. Have a roadmap, a long-term strategy where you want to go and show that you are paving the way to get to where you want to be. A technical code that is adaptable. Currently, technical codes are codes of minimum standards. And what I would say is that we need a technical code that is really quite short so that we can adapt it. We've been saying for the last 5 years that ACV should be included in the technical codes. Transversal planning in the urban scale, this is absolutely essential so that we can get to where we want to be. And of course, the life cycle, valuing this so that buildings maintain their value in the next 30 years. And the public-private participation and partnerships. If we don't collaborate, we shall not be able to solve the problem and we shall lose the battle. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and I urge you to take a step forward or a leap forward. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Bruno. And now I'd like to hand the floor to the Scientific Secretary of this International Congress, Lourdes Gutierrez, Elizabeth Suarez. They will take the floor in order to present the conclusions and also to read the conclusions of this Congress. Good afternoon. As the Scientific Secretary of the Second International Conference on Innovation and Sustainability in Social Housing, ISFIS 2023, we will hereby read the conclusions. Firstly, we would like to thank the Agency of Housing and Renovation of Andalusia for the initiative of promoting this conference, the University of Granada, in particularly the Advanced Technical School of Building Architecture and Engineering for hosting the event, the Scientific and Technical Committee, and all the collaborators for their dedication and efforts in the preparation and organisation of today's conference. And of course, we would like to make special mention of all of the participants who've made this conference a reality. We've been accompanied by 400 Congress participants, 222 attending in person, and we'd like to highlight its international character, something which has been achieved. We have had members connecting from Europe, from Portugal, Poland, Italy, as well as Latin America, and participants from Colombia, Ecuador, or Venezuela. As regards the number of scientific presentations that were presented, a total of 73 presentations were given, of which 23 consisted of speeches or presentations, and 28 in poster format and the rest in communications. We would like to highlight the enormous quality of all of the work that's been presented, all the studies and research. All of the contributions will be presented in a book of minutes which will be sent to all of the participants and will be made available openly on the Congress webpage. The recording of the event will also be available on the webpage in both English and Spanish. We can confirm that we have managed to create a working framework over the last 2 days in which we have fulfilled the main objective that was set for this conference, namely to provide a space for transfer and exchange of know-how, experience, aimed at a sector which is characterized by the acquisition of new commitments and also sustainable responsibilities. And using the thematic blocks of each of the congresses, the most relevant conclusions will hereby be presented and summarized as follows. Block 1, renovation and urban regeneration or renewal. The experts that participated in this block have reminded us that we must continue to advance towards a culture of renewal and renovation in urban centres, of maintenance and conservation based on recycling and durability. That it's necessary to promote a urban renovation and renewal model which will encourage balance and the development of common services, preserving diversity and also promoting local economic development. Similarly, we must also encourage the development of an adequate housing stock at accessible prices in accordance with the standards of habitability, efficiency and accessibility. Block 2, industrialisation and digitisation. Construction 4.0. The experience gathered and commented on in the second block showed us that industrialisation is the way forward to achieve the sustainability of our sector. It allows us to offer solutions to the main problems that we experience, as well as providing decent employment, attracting young talent and also reducing uncertainty thanks to the reduction of execution times. Additionally, economies of scale will also facilitate a reduction in costs. Furthermore, we've also concluded that wood represents an alternative for the decarbonisation of our sector. Industrialisation and standardisation coordinated with design will, in addition to other objectives, favour the achievement of accessibility. On the other part, there's also a clear consensus that it's essential to digitise processes in all their phases, from the early stage of design right through to execution and the subsequent life cycle of our buildings. Block 3, sustainability, circularity and energy efficiency in the housing stock. Within this block, the experts coincided on the following points. It's insufficient to just develop innovative, sustainable materials. A key factor will be the adaptive design or design adapted to the climate conditions in each space or environment, and also energy efficiency measures which will optimise and reduce consumption with a view to achieving the highest level of comfort of our existing housing stock. The construction sector is aware that it's responsible for almost 30% of contaminating emissions. Materials such as earth and the use of other materials which are obtained through technological processes such as recycling and waste management can also foster this sustainability model as a guarantor of circularity. The need for a consensus to operate at the level of buildings and also in public spaces will also offer a wide range of opportunities to obtain mutual benefits. Block 4, comfort, accessibility, etc. Comfort, quality and commitment, social commitment in housing. The good design of housing will allow us to reduce our carbon footprints, take into account the entire life cycle. Quality is also related to the logical selection of materials, and it's necessary to recognise non-conventional typologies and to work on their comfort. The monitoring of real usage conditions in buildings will allow us to implement corrective measures. The measurement of CO2 and the importance of ventilation have a direct impact on human health. And based on the foregoing, we hereby conclude that it is essential to establish synergies, new commitments on the part of all of the participating stakeholders. In this way, The public administration has to expedite regulatory adaptations in order to adapt to new paradigms that are appearing in the construction sector, procuring agile financing mechanisms. The public administration also has to set an example in all of its activities. Universities, training centres, research centres and technology centres underpinned by these scientific methods would also need to validate these ideas and results. Additionally, they need to redefine knowledge, capabilities and skills in order to provide professionals with the necessary training and skills. In terms of the production sector, it needs to promote a change in business model, providing space for redefinition and also defining a new product which, through its development, will reflect a stronger commitment to the environment and also a new field of technical innovation through this commitment to sustainability in materials and processes. Finally, society as a whole must move towards compliance with environmental parameters, aware of the use, making conscious use and responsible use of materials and conserving the environment. We would like to conclude the reading of these conclusions by thanking the Agency for Housing, Renovation and Renewal of Andalusia and for the organisation of this Congress. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite up to the stage one of the people who's worked so intensively with a great team behind them, and somebody who should and wants to wrap up to close this international congress, Juan Carlos del Pino, the General Manager of the Agency of Building, Renovation and Renewal of Andalusia. I'd like to invite you up to the stage to officially close the conference in a few minutes. But before that, we're looking forward to seeing this certificate, the certificate which indicates the carbon footprint of the conference. And for that, we have the CEO of the company, Biosphere, Sergio Cruz. He's going to deliver the results. We've all collaborated, scanning the QR code, and he will deliver the results to the Director General of AVRA, the President of the Congress, Juan Carlos del Pino. A round of applause, please, because we want this conference to be sustainable. We've collaborated towards achieving that goal, so please, a round of applause.
En ese certificado se puede ver la...
So the certificate indicates the carbon footprint of the conference. And it's not just important that we can determine the carbon footprint of the conference, but also look at ways in which we can offset this for the benefits of the environment. And this will be done in a forest here in Andalusia. And that's what makes this conference, this event, a truly sustainable conference. And now, as I said earlier, to close the international conference, I'd like to hand the floor to the Director General of AVRA, the Andalusian Agency for Building, Renewal and Renovation, who's the President of the conference.
Bueno.
Thank you, Carmen. Good afternoon. And firstly, I would like to thank the Secretary Lourdes and Elizabeth for your very interesting and detailed conclusions of this conference. Enormous work has gone into the organisation of this second international conference on innovation, sustainability and social housing, which is now reaching its end after 2 very intense days' work, as evidenced by the conclusions that have been read here in the auditorium. And in my opinion, the 2 days have been extremely fruitful. The first edition of the Congress, which was held in November 2021, was held at a period of great uncertainty because, due to the pandemic, there were no guarantees of success. Nevertheless, it was highly productive. Today, we can say that we have now held an event that has consolidated the conference, and the conference is here to stay. Because as occurred in ISVIS 2021, I think that we're now even more convinced that we have to continue learning, exchanging experiences, sharing innovations, and discussing innovation and sustainability in social housing. In such a ever-changing and evolving field, there's a lot of topics which will warrant the organisation of this type of forum, something that we promote at the organisation, something that AVRA has been promoting, with the inestimable support of the University of Granada and also the Association of Public Sectors Alvense. I would like to thank the entities and institutions that have collaborated for their contributions to the Congress. I'd like to thank the Technical Secretariat, the committees, Carmen, the moderator, for her steely control of the times allocated for all of these sessions. But I would also like to thank everyone for the work, dedication on the part of the agency that organised this forum: Antonio Berenjena, Elena Moron, Marta, Tili Santiago, Luisa, in short, absolutely everyone who's participated. They're great professionals who've not just organised the Congress, but they've also brought their knowledge and their experience to this auditorium in relation to the application of innovative and sustainability measures which can be applied in our social housing stock or park. I wish you the best. I also would like to ask you to think about the next edition of ISVIS. Those of us who form part of the organising team are extremely satisfied with the results. Firstly, due to the more than positive response and the number of people who've participated in this forum as speakers. A total of 70 experts, in fact, all without exception, have brought and shared the best that they have to offer in terms of their experience and knowledge. Therefore, I've only words for thanks for their tremendous contribution. As occurred in the first edition of ISVIS, I think we're going to leave the conference more convinced than ever that social housing has to be intrinsically linked to innovation and sustainability, and that we should do our utmost to continue on the same path and achieve a housing stock that is not just more sustainable from a social perspective, but also environmentally and economically speaking. I'd like to remind you of the first presentation at ISVIS 2021 on innovation in social housing, and then its importance was very clear at that first edition. And over that last year and a half, we've worked very hard to develop new lines of activity in this area. AVRA's technical experts have explained this in all of their presentations. And we're now applying BIM technology in our energy transition measures, and also developing NZEB buildings. We're also focused on industrialisation and the use of new materials such as poplar wood, a new formulae that can be applied in social housing. In short, we're applying innovative techniques, and the results indicate that we are on the right path. And over the last 2 days, we've also taken good note here in Granada, because we're really interested in discovering and learning about what's being done elsewhere, and taking advantage of everything that we can do to improve our existing housing stock. And I don't want to conclude this final speech by thanking Regional Minister of Development, Territorial Structuring and Housing, Rocío Díaz, for her committed support to this Congress. And finally, I would like to thank absolutely everyone who in different ways has participated in ISVIS 2023 and who have allowed us to draw some very positive conclusions regarding its development at the end of the event. And I can also say that 400 people have followed the Congress in different forms, 223 in person, another 168 via streaming. Finally, I would also like to express my satisfaction because, in my humble opinion, I believe that the objectives set for this conference have been met. Creating this ecosystem for exchanging initiatives and experiences, this exchange of knowledge among the participants in the auditorium and via social media has allowed us to promote this event and thus fulfill the mandate we received from Europe, which using the funds for the organisation of this Congress allows us to develop all of the measures that can be applied with the help of these funds to improve the lives of people, which is our ultimate aim. In this case, developing social housing that's much more sustainable. And without further ado, I would hereby officially declare closed the second International Conference on Innovation and Sustainability in Social Housing. And now, we look forward to seeing you at ISVIS 2025. Thank you to everyone.